Hey, this is Dane from featherprop.com. Thanks for joining me today. I'm doing something completely unique on my YouTube channel, and I want to talk about something today. If you're a regular subscriber to my channel, you've come here for outdoor videos. I apologize. This is not an outdoor video, and if this is not your bag and you don't like it, feel free to unsubscribe. I just thought this would be a great platform to talk about something that's weighing heavily on my mind, and I've been asked by some of my friends to respond to a video, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. Also, I think in my next video I'm going to talk about part 2 of this whole thing. So just bear with me. If you don't know what I'm talking about yet, I'll describe what's going on. Let me first describe myself a little bit too, in case you don't know. My name is Dane Kramer. I was a pastor for 11 years in the I was a licensed pastor for 11 years in the United Methodist Church. I left that a number of years ago to do some missionary work with my wife. Came back from that, kind of looked for something to do, and eventually started working, or not working, but volunteering my time at the county jail. I go to the county jail. I have to go tonight actually in a few hours, and I lead Bible studies. I've been doing that for about 8 years now. I'm not formally trained. I've never been to Bible college. I've been reading the Bible since I was a kid, and that's just it. So take it for what it's worth. Also professionally, I've worked as an investigator for over 35 years, and in that time frame, I have been trained in things like the Reed Advanced Interrogation classes, as well as Scientific Content Analysis, or SCAN. These are deception detection courses. One is a special, the other just an interrogation course. I have taken many courses in deception detections over the years, and I have taught a few myself. I'm not saying that I'm an expert in the field, but I'm probably better trained than the layman is, and I'm certainly very highly interested in it, and I try to keep my skills sharp. And all of that plays a part into what I want to talk about today. Back in June 25th, I'm going to look at my notes here. I have notes on my screen. On June 25th, a pastor by the name of Dana Coverstone, he is a pastor from South Central Kentucky. He released a video on Facebook, and then I believe it was later made available on YouTube. And in this video, he described 3 dreams that he had. And now he believes the dreams came from God, and he believes that they're prophetic, and he feels very strongly about getting the word out. These videos, I should say, the videos have caused a huge impact in the church. A lot of people are wondering about them. I've been asked about them, and it really has caused an impact on my thinking. I've spent a considerable time thinking and also praying about this video to try to formulate a response, because I think that it is important. At the very least, it's interesting. At the very most, it's very important. And I'll talk about that as I go. So on June 25th, 2020, Pastor Coverstone released a video describing 3 dreams. The first dream in that video that he talked about goes back to December of 2019, about 6 months before the video was released. And the timeline is somewhat important, and I think we have to consider that. In his first dream, he claims that he saw a calendar opened to January. He didn't just say that it was the year 2020. He takes it as 2020. I don't know if that's the case or not, but he didn't say that it was the year 2020. He saw a calendar open to January. He saw, I guess, a hand or something, flipped January, February, it paused at March. Then he said he saw a finger underline March and tap it 3 times. He then saw March and April and May flip by, and it stopped at June. Again, he saw the finger underline June and tapped it 3 times. He claims that he saw, and I have my notes here, he saw marching, he saw burning, he saw protesting, he saw people becoming angry, he saw a lot of chaos, he saw lines at hospitals and people sick and people on ventilators, and then he claims that he heard the words, brace yourself, brace yourself. He described it twice. And that was the first dream, which is described in the one video. Then he goes on, apparently on June 22nd, still several days before the release of the video, he claimed that he had another dream. And in this dream, he heard the words, I believe, part 2, very connected to the previous ones. He saw a calendar again. It was flipped back to September. He saw a finger underline September and tap it 3 times. Then the calendar was flipped back to November. Pastor Coverstone said this time it was not a finger, but he saw a fist strike the calendar, burst it into chaos. I guess he saw this he described a cloud of chaos. He said he saw armed protesters. He saw fighting in the streets. I'm reading my notes. He saw businesses and schools closed. He saw the roofs of banks being opened up and money being sucked out. He saw Washington, D.C. burning. He saw Russian and Chinese soldiers in the streets and people trying to hide. He then heard the words, brace yourself, brace yourself, brace yourself. He repeated that 3 times as he was talking about the video. The first time he said it twice. The third time he said it 3 times. And then he had a third dream that he recounts in this video. I take it to occurring on or around June 24th, just prior to the release of the video. And in this dream, he said he walked into a bank to get some change for a yard sale that his church was having. There was a sign on the door saying that there was no change available. He talked to a clerk, and the clerk told him to expect soon that 1s and 5s won't even be available, and that hyperinflation, that's what he calls it, would soon be something to expect. And then he heard the words once again, brace yourself, and he repeated it twice as he was recounting the video, or recounting the dream in the video. So I just want to talk about that dream a little bit. Now, first of all, he claimed it was prophetic, and he claimed it was about something to do in the future. The Bible does give us some instructions on how we can decipher these types of things. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, and verse 22, Moses tells us that if a prophet has a dream, or a prophet speaks, and the thing does not happen, it doesn't come to pass, then that person is not a prophet. And don't be afraid of that person. I mean, he's not to be counted. So the first thing we would have to consider, if someone makes a prophecy, if someone says something, does it come true? If it doesn't, we can simply discount this. Now, I will give Dana Coverstone credit. He claims that he's not a prophet, and I'm not either. He claims to be a Bible teacher, a pastor, not a prophet, and he does welcome criticism. He said, if all of this fails, I'm to blame. And he holds himself completely responsible, which I entirely respect. So the first thing is, does it come true? Now, there's more than that. The Bible also talks about in Deuteronomy chapter 13, the first 3 verses, Moses tells us that if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams comes up, predicts something, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing, and that sign or wonder comes to pass, let's say it does occur, that doesn't necessarily mean that prophet or that message is of God, because if the person who spoke it is encouraging people to go after other gods, as Moses pulls it, in other words, tells us, if that person is trying to pull us away from Christianity or from the faith, then we can know that even if the dream came true, not to follow that person, but that God had allowed it to test us. And so just because something does come true, we have to remember that what is the person saying. Now, let me talk about these passages first. In that last passage in Deuteronomy 13, let me talk about that first. I don't believe that Dana Coverstone is a heretic. I've watched a number of his videos. I've gone to his YouTube channel. I've gone to his Facebook page, and I would probably describe him as an evangelical, conservative. He seems to be preaching a gospel that is consistent with what I understand the gospel. Now, he is a premillennialist. He's a dispensational premillennialist. That word is always hard for me to say. And I am not. I'm an amillennialist. So we differ in our eschatological views. What that means is we differ in the way that we see the end times rolling out. That doesn't really mean anything. We do disagree, and I'm sure he would disagree with my take on Scripture, and that's fine. I don't believe that dispensationalists necessarily are heretics. There might be some who are, but I'm not saying that is necessarily a heresy. I would, based on what I know about Dana Coverstone, I would have no problem worshiping with him, serving with him, walking with the man, and he does seem genuine. So I don't see any heresy there. So I think I can kind of rule out the Deuteronomy 13 passage. I don't see that he's trying to pull us away from the gospel. So even if these words do come true, I don't see anything there. And I think that's important to know. Now, if I got to know him better, maybe I would say this guy's way off and you need to stay away from him. I don't know that. But based on what I can see, and those closest to him would probably know a lot better than I do, we have to take a look at the teachings of a person, not just whether or not what they say comes true, but what are they teaching, what are they instructing, and is that of God or not. Now, the Deuteronomy 16 passage, if it doesn't happen, the person is not a prophet. And Dana Coverstone does welcome criticism. I really appreciate that. In fact, he ends the one video by saying, if December 1st rolls around, this is on a second video, which I'm going to talk about next time. If December 1st rolls around and none of this has happened, then feel free to disregard this, and he takes full responsibility for his actions and words. Good. That's what we want to hear. There have been many so-called prophets over the years when what they say doesn't come true. They kind of just recalculate and they try to start all over and they try to explain why they were wrong. And I think a person needs to take full responsibility. And at this point, he's claiming to do that. Those are all good things, and I do give him a thumbs up for that attitude. And actually, just watching the man, I kind of appreciate where he's coming from. He seems to be sincere. He seems to be honest. Now, as an investigator, I did watch the video in particular for signs of deception, for indicators in which there could be deception, and I saw none. I saw nothing in there. I saw some consistency. I saw some things that would make me think that the person is being truthful. And I do believe that Pastor Coverstone does believe that he had these dreams, and I do believe that he believes they're from God. We just have to figure out if they really are. So I want to talk about these dreams now in particular and some of the things that he said. First of all, the first dream. He came to March. Obviously, March was big, and if you're in the United States, you know that in March the COVID quarantine went into effect, and life as we knew it kind of came to a halt. Everything got rearranged, and the quarantine began in March. So March was a very big month for the United States, not necessarily the rest of the world, but for the United States. And so we see, I think this video is very limited in its scope. He's not prophesying, if it's so called a prophecy, to the world, but to the United States and to the Christians here. Doesn't make it wrong or right. It's just that's what he seems to be suggesting. So March was a big month. Then in the video, he moves on from March to June, the same video, the same dream, I'm sorry. June, he moves there and taps it 3 times. And of course, in June, the George Floyd riots really took hold. The Black Lives movement really became first in the foreground, and there has been lots of rioting, there has been lots of protesting. So those things would suggest that if the dream was legitimate, in other words, if it was talked about early, that those things seem to have occurred. Now, later on in June, and I thought I had the date on my notes and I can't see it, but later on in June on his Facebook page, he did interview 2 older gentlemen from his congregation who they said that back in December, at a prayer meeting, he shared the dreams with them. Now, of course, we don't know those 2 men, but I'm taking everything at its face value. Again, I do believe that he had the dreams. Let's work with the fact that he probably had the dreams in December, shared them within December, and it does seem that that came true, so to speak. I'm not going to comment on that. The second dream, the part 2. Now, this is still yet future for us because this goes to September. I'm speaking this in July of 2020. In September of 22, that is supposed to be another large and big month. And then November of 2020. Did I say November 2022? I forget. Anyways, in November of 2020, this is where the fist hits the calendar and everything explodes. Now, of course, the election, the next presidential election, takes place in November, and he seems to suggest that this is going to be big. He actually sees Washington, D.C. burning, which is significant if, in fact, that does take place. Now, let me just say a few things about Dana Coverstone, things that he talked about himself, and this is rather important. He describes himself as being very well read. He describes himself as being interested in news all over the world. Those are his words. And he even says at about the 4-minute mark in his that first video that he reads 40 newspapers every day from all over the world, from all types of sources. Now, I say that not as a criticism of him, but it does point out that he is keenly interested in news and from the world and also national news. It sounds like he's keenly interested in politics, to be reading, to be digesting that much news all of the time, every single day. 40 newspapers is a lot. I don't know if he meant that as a hyperbole or whether that's real. That's a lot of news to be digesting on a regular basis. I say that only because it is possible sometimes that if our minds are so fixed on one thing and we are digesting, so to speak, something of great proportions, which he is, that it could very well be that we kind of begin to confuse the voice of self with the voice of God. And I believe that does occur sometimes because we're very, by nature, self-centered people. Even those of us who are Christians have that old fleshly nature. And so it's very easy sometimes to be very focused on something, highly focused on something that we have an interest in, and we just kind of assume, well, God must have the same level of interest in this that I do. So I'm not discounting his prophecy, but I am suggesting that I'm just saying that I saw that thread in what he had to say. He's talking about something that he himself is very, very focused on, reading the news, following politics. Now, I say that also because anyone who is following politics, anyone who is closely reading the news, and this has been said by other people who are not prophets, that this next election, this next presidential election in November is going to be huge. And I've heard people say it doesn't matter who wins, there is going to be riots, there's going to be protests, and it very well could be. So I don't even think we necessarily need a prophecy to tell us that that's the case. I think common sense would tell us that we're kind of heading that direction. Again, I'm not saying that we will have protests in November, but just the way things have been lately and the boiling point that they are reaching could very well indicate this is going to happen. Now, his third dream I found very interesting in that he went to the bank to get change. And that dream occurred on or around June 24th. Now, what's interesting is that on June 18th, just several days prior to the dream occurring, CNN ran an article on their website indicating that there was a national coin shortage. So several days prior to the dream, we do read that there is a national coin shortage. And so he claims that this dream occurred, and in that he learned that there was a coin shortage. So this is actually old news, not new news. It had already been developed. Now, recently, I've been to stores and I've seen signs saying there's a coin shortage, which is taking place. So this is not necessarily prophetic. This is something that he had a dream after the fact, so to speak. And if he's reading all of these news sources, there's no doubt in my mind that he probably read that. I'm not saying he's disingenuous. I'm not suggesting that. He could have subconsciously read it and just kind of processed it, or he just simply had the dream anyways. And this is maybe just to firm up his point that this is actually a shortage. Sorry, I had to touch the phone. It was going dark on me there. So he heard the words brace yourself once more, in that there's a coming, so to speak, maybe an economical situation. Earlier he said about banks being open and money being siphoned out. Could be. I actually was talking with a person who works part-time at a bank just the last week locally. She was telling me that she has never seen money being poured out of the bank like it is right now. So she said people are just drawing money out. They're spending it on projects. She works at a hardware store. Her other part of her job is, and she said that people are involved in projects. Money is being, just siphoned out. Now, again, I would expect this stuff to be already in the news if that's the case. I've heard earlier, prior to his last dream, I heard earlier that some of the local hardware stores, we have a Lowe's here in town. I heard in the first 3 or 4 months of this year, the second quarter of this year, that they did more in sales than all of last year, something to that effect. I don't know exactly. But again, if this is in the news sources, the stuff would not be about future events, but events that have already taken place. Again, I'm not suggesting he lied. I'm not suggesting that dream isn't prophetic. I'm just saying that though the information in that third dream had already seemed to have been out. Now, brace yourself, is what his message is. I do note that near the end of his message, or the end of his video, I should say, he recommended that people pray. I agree. We should always be praying about these events. We should be praying about what's going on. Do not stop praying, and we need to be in prayer. So I agree with him. Even without the dreams, I agree. We need to pray. His next message, so to speak, was that people, Christians, should be stockpiling food because of what's coming later this year in September through November, that we should be stockpiling food and also ammunition. So let me just say something about stockpiling food. As a Christian, and I'm just speaking just to the Christians here, not to the general public, because we have different points of view, obviously, but as a Christian, I have some concerns about stockpiling food supplies. When we stockpile food, when we put food in our pantry more than we need and we're building it up, what we're doing is we're taking it from those who don't, who may not have access to it. I'm not so sure that's a wise thing to do. It may be if God directs you to do it, but generally speaking, to be stockpiling food is also might be akin to not trusting God. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, "Look at the birds of the air; they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not of more value than birds?" And so He encourages us not to worry about the future, but to trust God. Now, if you're stockpiling food items or other items like that, so that you can distribute them, so that you can give them away, so you can help the people who need them the most, that might be a different story. But if you're stockpiling food supplies just for yourself, that seems rather self-centered, and I'm not so sure that's what a Christian should be doing unless that Christian gets specific instructions from God to stockpile supplies. I think we need to be trusting God, and we can trust God to supply us. Now, his recommendation that we buy guns and ammo, he does talk about the Second Amendment. It sounds like he's probably a gun owner, and this is something that he's very much interested in, and something that I almost would expect someone like that to say, perhaps. But I don't agree with him. I don't think that's necessarily what a Christian should be doing, to be stockpiling ammo. The question is, for what? What is this ammo being used for? If it's for hunting meat, okay, maybe that's the case. But I have a feeling what he's suggesting is, in the rioting, in the protests that are going to happen, that people should be using guns and ammo to protect perhaps their property. I'm not so sure our personal property is worth another person's life, especially if that person is a non-believer. To kill a non-believer to protect your car, for example, I don't believe is following Jesus very well. I think that to kill a non-believer, we diminish his ability to get saved. We diminish his ability to serve the kingdom if he's dead. And so I am very hesitant to take his advice. I'm not a gun owner. I'm not against guns. I'm just not a gun owner. I'm very hesitant from a Christian standpoint to be stockpiling arms and ammunition because of this happening. If anything, we should be stockpiling the Word of God. I believe we should be memorizing the Word of God. I think we need to get it inside of us just in the event that we can't access it in the future. That, I believe, is far more important than weapons. That's my own take, and that's what I sense from that. I'm going to wrap this video up because it's going on long enough, I think. So let me just sort of summarize. I don't know if his dream is from the Lord or not. It might have been, or it might have been an imagination coupled with his interest in politics and world events and so on and so forth. Bottom line for me is it doesn't matter. I don't see anything in here that really is going to change my life. My life is about serving Jesus and following him daily. My life is about becoming more and more like Jesus as much as I possibly can. And therefore, I don't see myself as changing anything in terms of this. I think maybe we'll look to the future. I'm going to trust God as I have been trusting God now for many years. I'm going to trust God for the future as well. If you're not a Christian, I would strongly recommend you consider the ways of Jesus, that you consider what God's will and purpose is for your life, and that you consider becoming a follower of His. It will change you. What God does that no other world, religion, or faith can do is that God gives us His Spirit, and He begins to change us from the inside out, changes our thinking, changes our character as to who we are, and makes us more like Him. And so this is probably the best way to prepare for a future, is to become more like Jesus. In my next video, I'd like to talk a little bit more about his next video. He does say some more things in that one that I want to address. So if you like this, give it a thumb up, subscribe, and next time I want to talk about Pastor Coverstone's second video concerning another dream that he had. Thank you.